Hello, good people. Welcome back to the channel. Dr. Lund here. And what I want to do with this video, since we had some time after reading the affidavit, and there's been lots and lots of information and channels that reviewed it word for word, but once I sat and kind of marinated in the information, it really generated a lot of questions that may be important, may have absolutely no importance, but see what you think. And as always, any thoughts that you have, or maybe answers to my questions, please feel free to put those in the comments section, and like and subscribe the video and to my channel if you feel that you can. Let's go ahead and start with, this is no particular order, but one of the first questions I had in listening about how he was under surveillance at his house when he got to Pennsylvania with his father after the long drive, that he was observed cleaning out his car while he was under surveillance. And I guess one of my questions, very basic questions, is if they thought, and apparently they did at the time, that he was a major or the only suspect, why would they allow him to continue to clean out his car and possibly destroy evidence or some evidence that could make the case stronger against him? Why didn't they do sort of an emergency order to go ahead and arrest him kind of right then and there, and maybe there is more of a process, but nonetheless seeing somebody maybe destroy evidence, I'm not sure why they would have allowed that to go on. Okay, here's another question that I had. Is in the affidavit, it talks about they have found a footprint right outside of DM, who is one of the roommates who was not harmed, right outside of her room. But it was found during the second processing. And I may be interpreting the verbiage wrong, but what it sounds to me like is that second footprint was not a bloody footprint, because that seems like that would be found immediately, if not sooner. And so what I wonder is if that footprint, instead of having blood on it, had, maybe gravel from, a driveway or sand or dirt, something of that sort that may have shown that he walked by, if it is his footprint, that he walked by before the murders, so there was no blood attached to his shoes at that point in time. Or, I'm just speculating, could it be because he had returned to the area around 9 a.m. the same morning of the murders? Could it be that he would have gone back into the house, maybe one realizing, okay, there was a victim that saw him, and as he was exiting, he didn't have time to deal with it, but had thought it through and came back? Or that he figured out he had left the sheath of his knife somewhere in the crime scene and was going back to see if he could retrieve it. Just a thought. And then from that point, leaving the sheath of the knife at the crime scene, I'm just picturing, after somebody does this horrific murder using a knife to 4 innocent folks, as he's walking out of the house, is he carrying the knife? Again, the affidavit doesn't say that the witness saw that in his hand, and that could be something that is true or was left out for other reasons. We don't know. We don't know what we don't know. But I'm just speculating again. if you're walking out and you have the weapon in your hand, and maybe because of the frenzy, you've got the adrenaline rush and whatever all the chemicals are doing to your mind and your body at that time. But once you get into the car, where do you put the knife? It's not in your pocket. Are you putting it on the passenger seat? Probably not, and again, speculation, probably not throwing it away or into the woods at the crime scene. That doesn't even sound reasonable. But again, I'm just kind of wondering, there was a thought that one YouTuber had that maybe the sheath was left there as on purpose, as sort of part of a maniacal game, or to somehow throw the police off, thinking that this was some military service person that would not fit his identity if in fact it is Bryan Kohberger. Again, just a thought. What are you doing with the knife? Are you walking out of the house with it in your pocket? I would think you're still carrying it. But then don't you figure out sooner or later, damn, I don't have the cover for this thing. I don't know. Just a thought. Another question that comes to mind is again from the cell phone pinging. It seems that he had gone back to the house and cell phone records put him in the vicinity or at the house at 9:12 a.m. 9:12 a.m. and he was there until 9:21 a.m. And so my first thought was he wants to see the chaos, return to the scene of the crime, sort of relive it as he's seeing all the attention from law enforcement, ambulances, and just a chaotic scene. That's, I guess, one possibility. I'm sure there are others about, the thought about going back. You left a witness and you left the sheath there. However, apparently nothing was going on because we don't think 911 was notified at that point. Now here's a technical question. So in the affidavit, and in, I guess, any investigation using cell phone pings, when they say it's near the home or the crime scene, how wide of a swath of an area does a phone ping and you can locate sort of where a person is? Is it miles from a cell tower? Is it, how do you know if it's north, south, east, or west of a particular tower? So that to me is interesting because they have so many cell ping records from where they believe Kohberger was and where his phone was turned on and turned off, and when he was near the house and when he was back at his own apartment. What I'm wondering is how much of a distance or circumference does that carry when you go from one cell tower ping to another, and can it be isolated that you are actually sitting in front of a particular area? That may be a very juvenile question, but I don't know the answer to that. Another basic question I had about what DM, the roommate, saw when she saw the murderer, and talked about him wearing black and had a mask covering his his nose and his mouth. I was curious, there was no mention, and we may find out later, was he wearing something over his hair? Because again, people lose hair at a crime scene, and that would be something again, I would think if you're going to commit that major of a crime, you would definitely want to make sure things like that were covered up. So it was more of a, was it more of a ski mask type of attire, or like a COVID mask? Again, just curious. This is another huge question I have about the DoorDash delivery to Xana, which you see a picture that was taken from the outside of the crime scene into the window of the kitchen, and it's from a Jack-in-a-Box. Again, I'm speculating that that is what she had ordered. However, as far as I know, there is no Jack-in-the-Box in Moscow, Idaho. I think it's been permanently closed for a while. The closest Jack-in-the-Box is actually in Pullman, Washington, on Stadium Way, which is the area where Kohberger's apartment was. And if the DoorDash delivery came around 4 a.m., I'm wondering, did they not see each other? Where Kohberger's in his car, DoorDash person is delivering. Where did he deliver? Did he deliver to the front door? Did he deliver to the sliding door? It almost seems too coincidental that there was food delivered there by someone who apparently the police have talked to and have cleared of having any wrongdoing. But it seems like it could be sort of a setup that you have somebody at 4 in the morning coming the same time. A huge crime is going to be committed within minutes of that delivery. That feels somehow set up. And again, could very well be coincidence, but, and I know kids order food after they drink and they go out on weekends. I get it, but that just seems way too coincidental for that timeline to be so close. And of course, we don't know if the cameras picked up Kohberger's Elantra driving back and forth and they could pinpoint that. I imagine they could do the same with the DoorDash driver as well, too. Just weird coincidence. Another question I still have kind of going through my head is about the 2 stops in Indiana. Now, he and his father traveled over 2,500 miles, and there's a lot of states in between Washington and Pennsylvania. So why Indiana? Why 2 stops that didn't result in any ticket? Kind of a verbal warning, sort of. I listen to a police scanner, and most of the time, all of the time, what I hear police report is that they're going to make a traffic stop, where it's going to be, the location. They call in the license plate number, and so by the time they get to the car and ask you for your driver's license and go back and call that in to see if there's any warrants or issues, and every time I hear on my scanner, they also ask for the ID of any occupants in the car, I suppose, to see if there is any outstanding warrants or issues for the people in the car. And none of that happened. And so I guess still my question is, were those stops planned or requested? Were they looking for something? Were they trying to verify the identity? Because they certainly had his license, but I didn't see them call that in or go back to the car and call it in to see if there was any issue with the license or with the car. And again, I would imagine they already called the car license plate in before they even made the stop. So again, I'm not a good sleuth. I'm psychology and psychiatry. But that still, I wonder. It's a how'd that happen and why'd that happen? Another question I have that I imagine at some point the information will come out is the second roommate that was left unharmed. If there's any statement that that particular roommate saw or heard anything, and again, it makes total sense that a statement was put out initially that neither heard or saw anything. As I said, it makes sense for their protection that statement was put out so that they wouldn't become a target, knowing that at that time the murderer was still at large and could easily be motivated to come and find them. So I am really interested in hearing what the second roommate might have heard or saw. One of the other issues that has kind of made the rounds is if Bryan Kohberger was in communication with the infamous Dennis Rader, who is better known as the BTK serial murderer. BTK standing for bondage, torture, and kill, who was arrested in February of 2005. This is Dennis, who you're seeing on the screen now, who has been in prison, and apparently one of Kohberger's professors had spent a great deal of time conversing with him, interviewing him, getting his story. I think wrote a book about him, and there was some speculation that perhaps Kohberger had tapped into BTK as somewhat of a needing a mentor in crime. However, from my work in prison, the one thing that I do know is that any prisoner, all letters are read before they're given to the inmates. Cells are searched on a regular basis, and any phone calls are monitored. They're listened into and as well recorded. So I think if that were an issue, that wouldn't be that difficult to trace back. However, I kind of don't think that happened. But again, I'm just speculating. I don't know for sure. And of course, I would want to know more about Kohberger's psychiatric history, issues that it sounds like he had an addiction to heroin, went into rehab. Love to know diagnoses, medication he'd been on, any therapy that took place, changes in behavior, especially some that were related, as some of his friends had talked about, to weight loss. If there was huge behavior and aggressive behavior changes, the things I think about, was he taking steroids? Were there other medications involved that had an impact on his mood, behavior, and aggressiveness? His relationship with parents, his sisters, any friends, and a dating life. Of course, I'd also want to know, we all want to know now that we have his DNA, if he is associated with any other crimes that had been unsolved, either in Pennsylvania or other places that he had been. And I think one last thing, at least for now, I would really like to take a look at what he wrote for his master's thesis. Writing a master's thesis is a pretty daunting task. It's not just writing a paper. There are guidelines and rules for, if you're using human subjects, you have to go through a particular committee an institutional review board, the IRB, to get approval for your research, especially if you're using human subjects. And that includes just asking subjects to fill out a questionnaire. The questionnaire we saw that he had posted of asking for voluntary participants to answer questions about how they felt while committing a crime was somewhat interesting to me, because usually in a master's thesis, at least my experience is, they want you to use a standardized tool that's already got the reliability statistics figured out. You know what you're measuring. It's been studied, rather than making up your own questions. Tool development for research is a feat unto itself. And so I find it interesting if that was part of his thesis for his master's degree. I would suspect not, but nonetheless, I would really like to be able to read his master's thesis, just to get a sense of what he was studying, what his writing's like, his interests, etc. However, that may be something that does come into play, since it's usually public and it's usually in the library of the university. They usually keep a copy of your thesis and your dissertations. So, folks, again, lots of unanswered questions. We are at the very beginning of this case. There is still so much more to come. I know he has, I think, a status hearing this week, this Thursday. And as we all move forward with this case, again, I'm just speculating. I know nothing more than the person standing next to me. And at this point in time, Bryan Kohberger is innocent until he is found guilty. But please let us all keep in our thoughts the families, friends of the victims. Those are really the folks that require so much support during this time, as well as Kohberger's family. That's, on both sides, it's unimaginable. But keep me posted. See if some of these questions were questions you might have had, or you might have had some very different questions about some of the information that has recently been released, and kind of what your sleuthing mind wants to know. Again, thank you again for listening. Please subscribe and like if you do, and we will see you again at the next one. I appreciate you all.